And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Welcome to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I am Russell Brown. Joining me today, JR Jordan Reid. Like I told you guys, we're going to be moving to 2 episodes a week because life is a thing, time is a thing, and sometimes it just doesn't work out to have 3 guys on a podcast at one time. So as you guys heard either earlier today on this fine Wednesday or on Tuesday evening, you probably heard CP and I talking combine between the offensive and defensive linemen, and then we've jumped into defensive backs. Well, you jump in with JR Jordan Reid. JR, how are we doing? My man.
I'm good, man. The combine is officially here, so that's the kickoff to the NFL offseason and definitely draft season, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, man. And like I was telling CP last night, it was just like, man, like it is officially here. Like we are just pretty much just under 2 months away from the draft, or exactly 2 months away from the NFL draft. This weekend is like Christmas Eve, and then in 2 months we are on Christmas Day.
Yeah, and it comes really fast. It felt like we were just at the Senior Bowl.
I know, man. And it's like it seems like just yet, like literally like yesterday I was getting on a plane and going to Atlanta and then going to Alabama, and it feels like the Senior Bowl went by way too fast. Like the first few days it was like, all right, we can get to the practices, and then we got to the practices, and then it was like, man, now it's time to go home. And it was like it was awesome, but it was terrible at the same time. So combine this weekend. We've been seeing measurements all day long, and I guess we could start with that. I know I'm kind of throwing a curveball into it, but we'll also talk about skilled guys. And then today you dropped your pre-combine top 50 big board, which you guys can check out over at cover1.net. And to be honest, the best thing that you can do is most certainly download the Cover One app. You go to your app store or within Google Play, you search and you find Cover One, you download it, and you can have Jordan's big board of his top 50 prospects right in your hands, and it's going to be great. I'm telling you guys, you want to check it out. It's easy to read, plenty of information on here. Check it out over at cover1.net. Download the Cover One app. But let's jump into actually just the combine measurements of today, some names that we saw. Was there anybody that really stood out to you through the initial portion of the weigh-ins for the combine today?
Yeah, and it was more of a down-the-line name, and it's Myles Gaskins from Washington. Coming in at 205 pounds, that was an extreme surprise to me because I think on the Washington's website, he was only listed at 195, I believe it was. But if you watch his film, he looks much smaller than that, and I did not expect him to come in at over 200 pounds. Now, he has a lot of mileage as far as carries in his career. I think he has somewhere around like 900 or something like that. So the number is relatively high. But I think if you can get him in day 3, I think that would be a really good selection because he does have that versatility that you look for in a complementary type of back, and him coming in at over 200 pounds is a real big plus for him. Now I want to see how fast he does run with that added weight, though.
Yeah, well, and he's one of those guys I think is just is going to be a great complement to whatever running back he gets to be paired up with at the next level. He's just one of those guys that I think can do a variety of things, but probably more so as like a pass catcher. I love his vision. I think that's probably one of the more overlooked things in his game. He's one of those guys that, cuts through the line of scrimmage, gets to that second level, and it's almost like times he's got like eyes in the back of his head or something. So I'm with you. I'm very happy that he checked in over 200 pounds. Another guy that I don't know how to take his measurement was FAU running back Devin Singletary, and he checked in at 5'7.5", 203 pounds, hand size 8.5. Not really worried about all that stuff, but this is a guy with a lot of tread on his tires, with I believe over 700 carries in his career. He's scored a ton of touchdowns in his career, but this is a guy that checks in at just under 5'8", just over 200 pounds, and he actually looks bigger on tape. and he runs a hell of a lot bigger on tape. I love the tape, and I'm going to trust the tape, but that measurement threw me off a little bit. Did that throw you off at all, or are you okay with it?
Yeah, it did, because he was listed at 5'9" on their website. And I know these official rosters, they do lie, but I thought he was a guy that would be more in the 5'9" range. I wasn't expecting 5'7.5". That really did surprise me. But his thickness holds true, because he came in at over 200 pounds, and he definitely looks that on film as well. And there's a reason they call him Motor. And even though he is small, he's not a big guy at all, but he has an endless motor, no pun intended, that he can just keep going no matter what. And that's what you come to see with his game as well. And I can't wait to see his landing spot, because I think that's going to be so important to his career, and just like any other prospect. But the great thing about Singletary is that he's the ultimate creator. Even when things break down or the picture is not clean, he's able to make that picture clean and create. So that's the good thing about him, and I'm interested to see exactly where he does land. And I think the biggest thing for him this week is going to be how fast he runs in a straight line in the 40. If he runs in the high 4.5s, I think he'll be just fine. That low 4.6, I should say, it does get a bit concerning, but as long as he keeps it in the 4.5 range, I think he'll be just fine.
Yeah, there's definitely some concerns within his long speed. You know, I was watching him against, who was it? Was it Buffalo? Just the other day, because he's probably going to be a guy that I write about as far as a scouting report here in the coming days. And this is just like, you see him break free and you're like, oh, he's gone. And I started writing down for the next play, and then I look and he got tackled from behind, and I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? Where's the long speed? But I kind of was expecting that. But one of the bigger names, and everybody's been talking about him and buzzing about him, Josh Jacobs out of Alabama, 5'10", 220. That's what he checked in at the combine today. Perfect weight, hand size, 10 1/8. This guy is probably the consensus top back on a lot of teams' boards, probably on a lot of draft evaluators' boards. Where is he on your big board, which we will dive deeper in, but where is he on your big board, and where are you on him as a prospect? Because I love him. I love the aggressive nature. I'm not really worried about that market share stuff, but this is a guy that I think can do a lot of things that are done for the team today, right?
Shots fired, huh? Oh, I'm a big fan of Josh Jacobs. He actually came in at 22 on my big board. So I'm not a guy that really rates running backs very high, outside of Saquon Barkley, just because he was a phenomenal prospect. But in years past, I just haven't been known to rate running backs high. But last year was an outlier for me with Saquon Barkley and Darius Geis. I actually had both guys in the top 10 because I was absolutely in love with both guys, but there's just not that high-end guy in this class to me. But Josh Jacobs has been the guy that people have really gravitated towards as that consensus top back, and his measurables have backed that up. 5'10", 220 pounds. He looks exactly like that. He's built like a freaking tank, and that's exactly how his measurables came in. He just runs with so much tenacity and so much violence. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he does end up going in the top 15 picks, but it's unfortunate that he's going to be limited at the combine with the growing injury, because everybody wants to see just how well he catches out of the backfield. And I think that's the story of the combine with these running backs as well, because all these guys have these gaudy numbers as far as rushing yards, but they have limited production as far as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Darrell Henderson, Devin Singletary, the list goes on and on. Even Josh Jacobs, Damian Harris is another great example. All of these guys have limited production out of the backfield, and we just want to see how soft their hands are when they catch out of the backfield.
Yeah, and Elijah Holyfield's one of those other guys as well. Limited production out of the backfield as a pass catcher. He checked in at 5'10", 3/8 and 217 with a hand size of 9 inches. And you guys can check this out over on Twitter at Charles Robinson. Great follow. He puts a ton of combine measurements, so that's where I'm getting all this information from. But a guy that I don't think has limited production out of the backfield, I think this guy is a sure thing, and he's my second-ranked running back, David Montgomery. He checked in at 5'10" 1/8, 222. He looks the part. He plays the part. There was a rumor going around, and again, and I saw you actually tweet this out. Everybody meets with everybody. We saw that at the Senior Bowl. David Montgomery, though, met with the Eagles. I love that fit. Not saying it's going to happen in the first round. Maybe it does. I mean, I didn't think Rashad Penny was going to go in the first round last year. He did. So maybe the Eagles take him in the first round. But what are your thoughts on David Montgomery, and how did you like his measurements? And then we'll move to some of the other positions.
Yeah, and I thought his measurables held true. Another guy that looked the part and exactly came in. The tape didn't lie. and his measurables came in very impressive. He actually didn't make my top 50. He actually was just outside of it. I like some other guys a bit better, but like I said, the story of this combine with these running backs are going to be their top-end speed, and that's the biggest question with Montgomery right now. We just don't know how fast he is. He has great vision. He can make people miss in the hole. He does bounce some runs a bit prematurely, but whenever he does that, he just doesn't have that top end or that second gear that you would like to see, and he gets stuck in neutral a bit, but the production was there as far as a pass catcher and a running guy that can run between the tackles or out on the perimeter as well. He has fantastic contact balance. He's known for breaking tackles. That's what his game is centered around, just because he doesn't have that make you miss type of wiggle consistently. Instead, he's able to have that good contact balance, and he just bounces off of guys every single time he's on the field. So I'm really interested to see just how well he does run and move around at the combine.
Well, let's move forward away from the running backs and I guess away from offensive lineman measurements. We didn't touch base on them, and maybe we will at the end of the show. Mainly Jonah Williams, who we'll get into it, but receivers, tight ends, these other skilled players, and then we'll jump into quarterbacks, which is your group, and I key you to that because you're a former quarterback yourself. Receivers this weekend. Who are you most excited to watch, and who's the one guy that you think is going to turn a ton of heads?
Well, a couple guys. Then similar to running backs, everybody wants to see just how fast these guys are going to run. Kaiir is a guy that immediately comes to mind. Kelvin Harmon, Hakeem Butler, excuse me. The list just goes on and on. You really want to see just how fast these guys are going to run. A.J. Brown is another great example, just because all of the receivers right now are really in the cluster. And everybody, there's so much disparity between everybody's rankings. DK Metcalf seems to be the consensus wide receiver one right now, but there's some concerns about him as well. There's some durability concerns there, and he just didn't put up the production that his traits would indicate. And there's a lot of variables that go into it. There was a lot of mouths to feed at Ole Miss, and they just didn't push the ball to him as much as you would like. But he's going to have a chance to differentiate himself amongst this cluster and come out as the consensus wide receiver one, like a lot of people think he can be if he goes out and tests really well. And if he runs those crisp routes, because route running has really been a bit of a question mark with him in the short to intermediate areas, because he's a taller receiver. So he's not able to sink his hips and redirect like some of these short, shiftier, quicker type of receivers like we do have in this class. So I'm really looking forward to see just how fast or how well DK does test and how well he catches the ball, because he has had some drops here and there. And on the subject of drops, I'm really looking forward to Hakeem Butler as well, because drops has been a bit of a weakness for him to this point, and he has one of the biggest or one of the largest drop rates among the receiver class in this entire class. So he's going to have a chance to answer some questions of just how well of a natural hand sketcher he really is. And A.J. Brown, I'm really looking forward to watching him as well. I think he's going to test a lot better than what people are thinking.
I think so, too, with A.J. Brown. I think he's going to turn a lot of heads. I think he's going to really put himself in a different category, if you will. I think he's been stuck in the middle of the pack. I know going into the year, he was kind of that consensus number one guy because he had all the statistics, everything that you needed to have. But he's one of those guys that I think fell into the middle of everything now. And I think he might emerge a little bit. Now, maybe he doesn't, and maybe he falls into the same category as Juju Smith-Schuster, which I've constantly said I think it could be a similar scenario for him on the draft if everything goes the way it's been going, where he goes at pick 62 and he's that guy, you know, going to Pittsburgh or wherever, a great fit in the second round, and he just emerges out of this class. But I'll agree with you. Hakeem Butler, this is a huge week. We talked about it pre-show. My article that I put out there on cover1.net, you know, 3 players to watch going into the combine. I think Hakeem Butler could do wonders if he tests well. He shows, you know, how fluid of an athlete he is, how high he can jump, but really more so how consistent are his hands. And when they go through that one drill where it's just, you know, the speed catching essentially of them going left to right, left to right, left to right down the line, I want to see how he does. How's that concentration? Another guy too, and, you know, we talked about a lot of guys at the top. Another guy that I think should be up there is Kelvin Harmon out of North Carolina State. I'm not saying that because of Ryan Finley, of course. I'm saying that because Kelvin Harmon's a beast. And this guy, man, is he not a fit for the Baltimore Ravens of a run-first mentality, a guy that loves the block? They just cut Michael Crabtree. You bring this guy in with Lamar Jackson, I think it does you very well. And he's not going to be a guy that goes out and catches, you know, 90 or 100 passes. But this is a guy that I think does a lot of good things from along the sideline in jump ball areas, bails his quarterback out of bad throws, but this is also a guy that I think can work the middle of the field. Maybe not as consistent as like a Deebo Samuel or a Terry McLaurin, but he does things differently than most receivers in this draft. That's why he's my top receiver. So I'm curious as to how he tests. I don't want to see a bad 40 time, and I don't really even care about that. I'm more so curious of like the 3-cone drill. What can he do with his hips? And really, what are the measurables at for him? Who's a guy at tight end? Is there a tight end in this class outside of we all are expecting TJ Hawkinson, and like you mentioned earlier on Twitter this week, he is the safest pick, probably maybe not the safest pick in the draft, but one of the safest players in this draft. Is there a tight end that you think can emerge out of this group that's just going to be an absolute beast and test incredibly off the charts?
Well, we know Noah Fant is going to test off the charts. I expect him to jump 38-plus inch in the vert, and I think he's going to run in the 4.5s or high 4.6 in the 40. So I think he's going to test off the chart. I think Irv Smith Jr. is another guy that's going to test really well, and those three are really that first tier. And all of those guys are going to just look different from everybody else. But another guy who I think is going to test off the charts is Isaac Nada. I think he's going to test really well, and I don't think he's going to run very fast, but as far as the other things, I think he's going to be very successful. And then Dawson Knox is another guy that could have a very good showing as well, but a sleeper name right now, but he's starting to rise and get a little bit of steam the closer we get to the draft, is Jay Sternberger from Texas
you took
A&M.
my guy.
I think he, coming out of the combine, I think he's going to fully entrench himself as the tight end 4 in this class. He's actually tight end 4 for me right now. He's a fantastic red zone weapon. Not very straight line speed fast, but as far as being able to get in and out of routes, fantastic hands, he definitely has that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Sternberger tests.
I can't disagree with any of that. I agree. Fant, Hawkinson, and Smith Jr. are the guys that are probably in that first tier. You get to Nada and you get to Sternberger as second tier guys. I like Dax Raymond out of Utah State. I'm curious as to where he tests. He looks like a fluid athlete in the middle of the field. 6'5", 245 is what he's listed at. So I'm really curious as to what he can do. He did miss 2016 with a back injury. So I'm curious as to is he healthy? It seems like he is, but he's one of the guys that I think, if the medicals check out for him, he fits a lot of different roles. And it certainly seems like he could fit in, a place like, I know they have Dallas Goedert, and I know they've got Zach Ertz, who is an elite tight end, by the way. But Dax Raymond, I think Dax Raymond is a guy that would fit very well in multiple 12 personnel groupings, and does a lot of different things and finds himself on the field a lot. And this is a guy that maybe fits a team like New England, who likes to use multiple tight ends. I think there's probably 5 or 6 tight ends in this group alone that are going to be top 50 players on my board. I don't have the exact number off of your board of how many tight ends. I didn't do the math of it, but am I wrong for thinking that, or is that pretty accurate number?
Oh, not at all. This is a phenomenal tight end class, and it goes back to the Evan Ingram and O.J. Howard type of class of a couple of years ago. I think there's not as much star power at the top or potential as those guys, but I think overall, as far as the depth in this class, I think it is fantastic. And it's not just on day 1. It goes well into day 2, where I think most of the impact will be felt. You have Dawson Knox, Isaac Nada, even a guy like Josh Oliver, down the line, guys of that sort. Donald Parham, who's not going to be at the combine, but I think teams will take a chance on him in day 3. And the list just goes on. And I think there's so much depth in this class because it's not just guys that are just pass-catching tight ends. You have dual-threat guys as well that can be inline blockers or even flexed out and be a threat as a receiver in the slot as well. So I think this tight end class is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Josh Oliver. If he can show that he can catch a freaking football, I'm all aboard Josh Oliver, but we'll see what happens. Another guy, too, is I'm going to butcher his name, Elise Mack out of Notre Dame.
Yes, I love him.
He's an athletic freak, man.
Yes, former 5-star recruit. He was the number 1 tight end in the country in 2016, I believe it was, or 2015 or something along that sort. His story is pretty unique. He sat out his junior year because I believe his sophomore year it was. He had to sit out because he was academically ineligible.
Yep.
He never put up the numbers that you would expect of a top recruit. Was a bit overshadowed by some other guys. Durham Smythe was ahead of him on the depth chart and some other guys as well. So he never had that potential, or he never lived up to that potential. But maybe, some of these NFL coaches are thinking they have the secret recipe to get it out of him because obviously he has the talent, being a former top-ranked recruit. And guys that were former five-star recruits, NFL teams are going to treat them like former first-round picks. And they feel like they can get that talent up out of them.
Yeah, well, and, Ian Thomas is one of those prime examples. He was my top tight end last year, only caught like 26 receptions in his collegiate career at Indiana. Mac caught 36 receptions last year alone, but at the same time, Ian Thomas was drafted in the 4th round simply because I think, one, it was a great fit for Carolina. He fits what they're looking to do. But at the same time, it was like, you draft this guy because, yeah, he's a little raw and rough around the edges, but this is a guy that you can mold and build and put together as your guy. And I think Mac could be one of those guys later in the draft. He'd be a great fit, I think, with Josh Rosen in Arizona. Maybe New England if they're looking at another tight end. Of course, we all speculate that Gronk could potentially retire. Who knows? It'll be interesting how that all goes. But let's move away from tight ends. Let's move to quarterbacks. This is a group that you are very strong with your opinions on as far as Dwayne Haskins as your top quarterback, Kyler Murray behind him. What's your feel on this group going into the Combine?
I'm actually a fan of this group, and I think it's a bit top-heavy. I think the 3 guys that are definitely at the top, I think it's Haskins, Murray, or any other order that you do have. And I think Drew Lock is that distant third right now. But then you get into Daniel Jones, Will Grier, and on down the lines, Brett Rippon, Gardner Minshew. The list goes on and on of guys that you may like. But with this class, I think it is very fascinating because there's no entrenched number one guy at the top like we've seen in years past. And the 2018 class was a bit outlier because guys flip-flopped every week, it seemed like, because nobody knew who Cleveland was taking at the top. It started out as Sam Darnold, and then Baker Mayfield just stormed to the front at the last second. And we're starting to see that with this class. And Haskins and Murray are definitely the top 2 guys, and I think they're going to go back and forth as that top guy. But at the number 1 pick, the Cardinals really don't need a quarterback. But now you're hearing rumors surface, and the Cardinals are not doing anything to dispute them not taking a quarterback at the top. We don't know if they're just doing it to create leverage to auction off the pick, or if the Kingsbury and Kyler Murray previous marriage really has merit at this point, and they may take him at the top. We don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see what does happen. But just staying on subject with this class, I'm a big fan of Dwayne Haskins, and he's not a guy that's going to be flashy. He's not going to launch the ball down the field. He's a guy I like to say takes a death by 1,000 paper cuts type of approach. He's just going to shred defenses underneath, and then he's going to take timely shots down the field. Now, he does need some work on his down-the-field accuracy. He is a bit inconsistent in that area, but I think from an intangible standpoint and a mental capacity, he has everything that you're looking for in a franchise quarterback.
Well, and I'll tell you, man, I agree with you. I like this class a little bit more than I did, probably in August, September, but at the same time, Kyler Murray, and maybe I'm just speaking because I'm burnt out by the question. It's so fascinating, but every radio show that I've been on, I've been asked about Kyler Murray time and time again. And it's like, dude, if I get another Kyler Murray question, I'm going to flip out. And it's like, but it's so intriguing because we could potentially see history in 2 months when he goes in the first round, because he's going in the first round. So we're going to see history made where we get the first player ever taken in the first round in the MLB draft and in the NFL draft. And this guy's 5'10". Peter King's saying he's up to 206 pounds. We'll see what he measures in at. And I know everybody's like, well, he's Russell Wilson. He's Russell Wilson. Well, Wilson measured in at 5'11", 204. So if he hits that threshold, I can get on board with the pro comparison. I don't like pro comps, but I can get on board with it. But at the same time, dude, he is so polarizing, and it's like he does things that just other quarterbacks can't do. And regardless of his height, like he can go out there, you know, he throws with such ease. His arm strength is so strong. Like maybe it's not like 90 yards down the field. It's not like Josh Allen strong. It's not even Drew Lock strong, but like he does things so quick, and his ability to expand plays beyond the pocket and make things happen. I'm so like fascinated by him, but I am so tired of talking about the guy like at the same time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you because it just seems like it's been forever from just how magical he was down the stretch of the season. He really caught up to Dwayne Haskins and Tua in the Heisman Trophy race and ended up overtaking him. So we've been talking about him since then. Then came the entire baseball or football ordeal. Now we're dealing with, is he going to go number one overall, and his height and weight concerns. So it's been a never-ending process, and it feels like we've been talking about him forever. And I'm right there with you. It has become a bit exhausting, and you just finally want answers. Is he going to throw at the combine? What is he going to measure at here in the coming days? Just what teams are really going to be interested in him. So it is a bit of a tiring process, but that's exactly what happens during draft season. And we know he and Rashawn Gary and Greg Little are probably going to be the top 3 most polarizing prospects in this class, and they're going to be 3 guys we are really going to talk about in the coming days.
Yeah, it's you know, it's not like I'm like, it's like hard to put in words just because we've never had something like this, and it's like it does get exhausting. So aside from those 2 guys, and obviously you touched a little bit on, you know, Drew Lock being up in your top 30, and he's a guy that's, you know, obviously down the line from Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins. And I like Dwayne Haskins a lot. I know a lot of people are pointing to, you know, his lower body mechanics are a little bit out of whack, and I think it can all be fixed. I mean, remember, this guy's had 1 year as a starter at the collegiate level. Things are going to be a little crazy, but he did some things at the college level that quarterbacks through 4 years can't do. He did things at Ohio State that Ryan Finley never did at NC State, okay? But who's a guy behind, you know, kind of those consensus guys, like one of those day 3 guys that you're like, you know what, if he has a good combine, he could move up the board?
Oh, it's Gardner Minshew by far. I love his story. I love his mental makeup. I love his background, and I just love everything about him. And he's not a guy that's going to be flashy with arm strength, but I think he's a guy that's going to be one of the higher-end backups in the league that may have a Case Keenum type of story down the line, back that magical year he did have with the Vikings last year. And what you notice about Minshew is that you always hear about the intangibles with him and the leadership qualities. Even going back to the Senior Bowl, the first thing that Jim Nagy said about him was he was the only quarterback that was in the hotel lobby trying to get snaps a day early before practice from the centers. And just little things like that are things that you love to hear from Gardner Minshew. He's a fantastic leader. You talk about a guy that has championship DNA. He won a junior college national championship before he got to East Carolina. And a lot of people don't really know that about him. He set plenty of gaudy records when he was at Washington State. You hear about everybody gravitating around just his leadership qualities, and that's the things that you look for in these quarterbacks, especially with a guy of his story and his stature.
Yeah, well, and like I'm completely on board with you. I love the things that he does in the pocket too. Like he is so like shifty in there. Like outside of Kyler Murray, I would have to say Gardner Minshew probably does more inside the pocket than anybody else. Like he can make something out of nothing. And it's incredible to me because like he is a little guy. Like he did check in at 6'1" at the combine, which I guessed correctly, by the way, but I did not think he was going to have like almost 11-inch hands, or maybe he did have 11-inch hands, but like he just fits like probably a day 3 guy, no doubt. But like if he comes out and he's more prepared for the combine than anybody else, he's going to shoot up boards. And another guy too is Tyree Jackson. I know you're a fan of him out of Buffalo. This is a guy with a huge arm, and this is exactly what fits like the combine. Guys with big arms. If everything he does is under control and the mechanics are down right and everything he does is like contained and good, then like he could be a guy I think shoots up into that probably late day 2 conversation, but there's no reason for him to like not be drafted at all. And there's no reason to think that he can't go sooner than day 3, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but like I'm starting to grow on Tyree Jackson a little bit. I was watching, Buffalo over the weekend, and I was like, you know what? I can see a team saying, hey, I can work with this.
Yeah, and he's a guy I really keyed in on at the Senior Bowl. I got a chance to actually stand beside him
He's
during
huge.
one of the practice. He's every bit of 6'7", 250. And he's just like a freaking oak tree when I stood beside him. Like, I was standing in his shadow. Like, he's that huge. So, and as you dive deeper into the film, and he's a guy you have to watch multiple games on, because if you pick certain games to watch, you're not going to be impressed by him, or you're not going to be intrigued by him, because the accuracy is never going to be good with him. That's something you have to understand about that. I compare him to Cam Newton, not saying he's going to have the upside of Cam Newton, or that he's the athlete that Cam Newton is or ever going to be. But he's never going to be a guy that completes over 60% of his passes. And Cam had an outlier year this year. He was fantastic during the earlier portions of the year where he was completing nearly 70% of his passes. But over Cam's career, he's rarely ever completed over 60 to 62% of his passes. And I think that's an area where Tyree Jackson is going to hover around. And it happened at Buffalo. I don't think he was ever over 61% when he was there. So he's never going to be this pinpoint accurate type of quarterback, but just the value that he provides in the running game. Teams are going to be terrified to tackle him in space, and you have to get him incorporated a bit in the quarterback running game a little bit, similar to a Josh Allen last year. That's how he gets his comfort into games, and he just has this rocket arm. Now, he needs to tone it down a little bit and get through his reads a bit more quicker than what he does, because he sticks on reads. That's a big deficiency with him. But once he learns to progress through and just get through faster and not having such a delay in his progressions, I think he's that type of guy you take and you stash for 2 to 3 years behind a firmly entrenched type of veteran quarterback, and you groom him for 2 to 3 years while he's sitting behind, let's say, Phillip Rivers or somebody like that has 2 to 3 years left in the tank. I think in 2021 or 2022, he definitely could turn into a long-term starter.
Chargers, that'd be a great fit. Honestly, that'd be a great fit. Another great fit, too, with just the offensive firepower that they have, is the Giants. And I want to bring up one last question for the Giants, and then we'll move to your top 50 pre-combine big board, and then we'll get out of here. But not with Tyree Jackson, but with Pat Shurmur, he was asked about his son, Kyle Shurmur, quarterback out of Vanderbilt. First of all, I didn't even realize Kyle Shurmur's like 6'4", 230. That's what he's listed at. Mm-hmm. Like, that's crazy to me, because, like, you know, Brett Ripien checked in at like 6'1". Easton Stick checked in at like 6'1". So these guys are a little bit undersized. And you see Kyle Shurmur, and it's like, dude, this guy's huge. And at the same time, it's like, could this guy be potentially, like, I don't, like, what are the odds? What do you think the odds are this guy getting drafted by the Giants, and the Giants just completely passing up a quarterback at 6, or that both quarterbacks are considering are gone at 6? But what are the odds that they even consider a guy like Kyle Shurmur?
Yeah, I'm sure he's on their board, because, I mean, if there's one person that knows everything about him, it's his dad. Right. I'm sure. Being a coach's son, I'm sure he's extremely smart, and it shows up in his game. But like Ryan Finley, he's a guy that is on the thinner side. I know he weighed in at 230, I believe it was, but he's not on the thick side of things. He's very real thin, and he needs to add some weight on his frame in order to hold up. A pocket presence could be a little better. I don't think he has a really good feel of what's going on around him, and he holds onto the ball a bit longer than what he does or what he should in certain areas of the game or throughout games. But the great thing about Shurmur is that, like I said, he's a coach's son, so you know he's going to be extremely smart. He's going to know where to go with the ball at all times. But when he has to progress through and gets to that third or fourth read, that's really where he does struggle. And when he can't get the ball out quick, he does look a bit confused at times. And I thought he was decent at the NFLPA game when I did watch him in that. But obviously you can't really judge all of these guys by bowl games, because they're playing with a lot of people that are foreign to them. They don't have any prior relationship with them. So I'm not going to strictly judge him by that game. But I thought he had a fantastic year last year, throwing for 20-plus touchdowns last year and minimal interceptions as well. So he could be that 6th or 7th round option, or even a priority undrafted guy as we get close to April.
Yeah, I found it interesting when I was seeing like the combine questions that were coming up today, and I didn't even put two and two together. I was like, really? Pat Shurmur's kid? I didn't even like think of that. And it was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I don't know. We'll see what happens on that end. But let's get into your top 50 prospects for the pre-combine here on your board. And we start at the very top. And I'm not going to go through every single one. But number 1, Quinnen Williams, followed by Nick Bosa. And then number 3, Ed Oliver. Number 4, Josh Allen. And then number 5, Jonah Williams. So I will say this. You and we have the exact same top 5, which I applaud you, my friend. Tell me about this top 5. I think we all know where it's at, but what's kind of your general feel for these top 5 guys? Are these your 5 blue chip guys, or is only one of these guys a blue chip guy? Or how do you go about putting these 5 together?
Well, I think my top 3 guys, I would classify them as elite type of prospects. And starting off with Quinnen Williams, I know Nick Bosa is at the top of most people's draft board right now. And draft boards fluctuate. Big boards fluctuate. I could flip-flop. Both of those guys can be interchangeable. Honestly, I went back and forth on both of them from time to time. But I just absolutely love Quinnen Williams. And I'm of the belief Mike Mayock had a fantastic press conference about this today, where he went in depth of how important interior pressure is as opposed to exterior pressure, because interior pressure is directly in the sight line of these quarterbacks, and it makes things extremely difficult, as opposed to exterior pressure, where you can step up in the pocket and they can avoid it a bit more easily than opposed to a guy that's right up the middle of their face. And we see it with Aaron Donald, and I'm not comparing Quinnen Williams to Aaron Donald or anything like that. But as far as the disruption that both cause up the middle, I think Quinnen Williams can be something similar to that, and he can play so many different roles as well. Only 21 years old, and he's only been a one-year starter, I know, but I think the development that he's going to take in his career in the earlier steps, I think he's going to be a fantastic player. And Gerald McCoy has been the common comparison for him. I think he can have an even greater type of impact early on and throughout his career than what McCoy had. So Quinnen Williams is at the top. Nick Bosa, he's a fantastic blue chip type of prospect as well. Just fantastic ability to turn speed to power, and his hands are so violent off the edge. But there is some durability concerns, and I think he's going to be just fine in the NFL. But that seems to be the common conception about him, is that he does stay injured a bit. He tore his ACL to end his high school career, and then he had the core injury last year as well. So medicals are going to be very big for him. But I love that he already came out and said that he's going to do every single thing at the combine. And then coming in at the 3 slot, is Ed Oliver. And I think a lot of people are really overthinking Ed Oliver just because he's going to be undersized. And I don't think he's going to measure over 6'1". And it wouldn't surprise me if he does measure under 6'1". And as long as he comes in the 265 to 275 pound range, I think he'll be just fine. But coaches are going to find a way to get playmakers on the field. And that's exactly what Ed Oliver is. And just off pure explosion, he's going to be able to win so many single blocks and one-on-one matchups. And I think you can place him at any position along the defensive front, and not at one technique. I don't think he's going to be able to consistently hold up there. And that's what he played at Houston. They had him in the head-up zero technique for a lot of parts of his career. But at that 3 spot, or even on the exterior at that 5 spot, I think he can just have a fantastic impact.
I agree. Ed Oliver's a guy that is just so explosive. I know there was a tweet out there. It might have been Lance Zierlein. I know Lance Zierlein was maybe wilding out a little bit and saying, I'd line him up inside as a linebacker. I think that's a little crazy. But I think it might have just been like one of those maybe Tony Pauline things. But so don't quote me on it. But it was like they would line him up outside as a stand-up edge. And I'm like, man, I'm cool with that. Like that's awesome for me. Like absolutely. Do you agree with that on Ed Oliver? You think that would be a strong possibility? I think his versatility is great, so I think he could go any direction despite some of the height concerns and length concerns and really just the weight concerns. But this is a guy that I think has that versatility and explosiveness to go anywhere. I love him as a potential fit on the outside. Maybe not, but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think he could hold up at the 3 just because of how explosive he is. But if you're asking him to just stand in there and hold his ground against double teams, he's not going to be able to do that just because he's so light in the pants. He's not going to be able to stand his ground, anchor, and just hold up against 2 blockers. That's just not what he does. But if you ask him to be a Grady Jarrett type, to just penetrate and get up the field, I think he could be exactly that.
Well, I find this interesting, and as I'm scrolling down your board, I got to ask, when you got into because I've been doing my big board and putting it together and everything, when you get in through 10 through 20, 11 through 20, when you start getting into that range, obviously the grades kind of figure itself out, but when you start looking at it, how difficult was it saying, you know what, Greedy Williams at 15, maybe I'm too low, or you see Jawan Taylor at 14, you're like, man, this is a great grade, but I feel don't you feel almost yeah, and I know it's pre-combine, so it's okay, it is what it is, but you look at those numbers and you're like, okay, Jawan Taylor at 14, he's got great film, and I feel like he should be higher, and 14 might be too low. Like, did you get that feeling at all? That's how I felt when I was putting the board together, and I was like, man, I feel like this guy should be higher, but this is where he fits on the grade.
Yeah, and that's something that happens. And that's why I said these grades fluctuate. And it just points to recency bias. And that's why you have to develop a grading system. And that's something that I've been able to do over the years because it just helps you so much. Because if not, you're just going to go off feelings. Because some guys make surges up the boards at the last minute. And you're like, man, I might just be too low on this guy, or I might be too high on this guy. So that's why establishing some type of grading system will help you so much, because it helps you stick to your grade.
Right. And now you've got Jeffrey Simmons at 23. I know we've talked about him being, he was a top 10 guy for most of us. I know we talked about him a few weeks back. Down to 23, is that simply because of the torn ACL?
Yeah, and he was a top 10 player for me prior to, but I just can't see anybody taking him that high. But as far as an overall talent perspective, he's by far a top 10 player. He probably would have been in my top 5. It probably would have been Quinnen, Nick Bosa, Ed Oliver, and then Jeffrey Simmons probably would have been directly behind all those guys.
Which is crazy, man. Like, it's like 3 defensive tackles in the top 5. It sounds crazy, but those guys are that good. And it's like, unfortunately, towards ACL, I'm like, it's terrible, but it's just bizarre. Rashawn Gary at 25. You've got him listed at defensive tackle. I love it. I think 25 is a great spot for him. That's where I think, as of right now, let me switch on over, but I'm pretty positive that's where he's at on my board. How do you feel about him? I know you were quite high on him, but 25.
Yeah, and he's a guy that's going to be a polarizing prospect in this class because he turns it on and off so much. He has an on and off switch. His motor goes hot and cold from time to time, and that's what you see with Rashawn Gary. And some coaches are going to take him or have the feeling as if they can get those traits out of him consistently. What I'm interested to see is, do teams have him as an edge rusher, or do they have him as a defensive tackle? That's something that I'm interested to see, because his ranking is going to be fluctuated on so many different boards, and disparity is going to be a wide gap, because some teams they're going to get a Robert M. Nkediche type of vibe from him, and they're just going to ask, how much does he really care about football? A guy that's already started his own agency as well. So they're going to think he has some other interests outside of football. Yeah,
again, he's one of, like, every year, man, I get like this hunch of players that just like kind of boom or bust. And Rashawn Gary's up there. Brian Burns are up there. Those are just two guys that I just have a hard time placing. And I've talked about with CP on it of Brian Burns of, it's great when you watch the highlights of a guy, but like if you really watch his Wake Forest game and not the highlights of that game, you're noticing, like, granted, like we've seen that he's been listed at 227 for his weight, so this could be part of it. But like 5-6 plays at a time, he's not on the field. And then at the same time, you get this guy that is really productive, but then he's not. So it's just like, I don't know. It's crazy. Anything else that you want to add to your big board? That, final closing thoughts. I love that you have Taylor Rapp at 34, your number 1 safety. Mac Wilson down there at 35. Dalton Reisner at 37. Anything else you want to add to your big board? Obviously, you guys can check this out over at cover1.net.
Yeah, and I like to treat my board a bit different because I take positional value into question with mine. And I know T.J. Hockenson was a bit high at 7, and I had both quarterbacks in my top 20. I had both guys in my top 10 as well. So both quarterbacks in Haskins and Murray. And I just take positional value with my rankings. So let's take a guy like a Taylor Rapp. I don't think a safety is going to go that high, or I'm not going to have a guy that high like a Minkah Fitzpatrick or a Derwin James, just because they do play safety. But I thought those guys had overglowing type of qualities that made them elite or near elite type of category. So they were pushed up my board. Saquon Barkley and Darius Geis were another great example from last year as well. And I'm not as high on some of these running backs in this class, and that's why I didn't have any of them in my top 20 at all. So go check it out on Cover One. It's some really good stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they change as we get closer to April.
Absolutely. And you guys can, of course, stay up to date with the Combine by following us on Twitter at RussNFL Draft, at JReid, REID NFL, so at JReid NFL. Smash those follow buttons. The Combine schedule is as follows. Friday, March 1st, You got the special teams players, offensive line, and running backs. Saturday, March 2nd, you got quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. Sunday, March 3rd, defensive linemen and linebackers. And Monday, March 4th, it wraps up with defensive backs. And to see more of JR's pre-combine top 50 prospects, all you've got to do is go to cover1.net, and it's right there. It's the very first thing that you will click on. You can also find it on the Cover One app, which you can search in your app store, download for free, and you'll have us on your fingertips. You can also become a premium member, a $10 one-time fee for the entire year. We've got you covered for premium content from X's and O's to scouting reports, and I promise our scouting reports are not like cut and dry, just some facts and this and that. No, it's detailed injury history, clips of what we're watching, what we're seeing. So check it out over at cover1.net. JR, my man, I appreciate it. We'll be back next Wednesday, same time, same place, doing the same thing, probably recapping the combine. So JR, go get some food, my man. I'm going to go do the same. You guys have a fantastic Wednesday, a fantastic rest of the week, and enjoy the combine. We'll see you guys next week.